everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. And welcome to episode 238, When You Can't Do Revisions That Are Requested. This is a complex topic, and like everyone, I've received some mixed revision feedback where I had to make the call on if I was going to do the feedback or not. Could I do some of the feedback? Did I want to, try to do some of the bigger things? And what I wanted to talk about in this episode today is how to think through some of those big decisions regarding feedback that comes back from reviewers. So, one of the things I'd first consider is for the revision feedback, how much does it bother you or how much do you care about it? And what I mean by that is, could you do the revisions that are being asked for and you're not going to have any problem with doing them other than the time or the labor or something like that? But you're not going to have any kind of like philosophical problem with it. This happens sometimes to our clients where they'll come back and they'll say, well, I can do all of these revisions. And I'll say, well, how long would it take you to do them? Is it something that's structural that maybe has to take place through the entire manuscript? So it might take a little longer. Or is it something that is a one-time only fix? And we have an episode on this and how to kind of sort and organize revision feedback. I will make sure that we put that one in the show notes because I'm a big believer in not just going top to bottom through the reviews and saying, okay, I'll do that one and this other thing. I think it's much more helpful to look at all of your reviews together and then decide how big are these changes, and then do they have to happen once or in multiple places in the manuscript, and then working accordingly. So that's another episode, but I'll leave that one for there. So my first thing is always when you're looking at these revisions, do you have a problem in theory about doing any of them? If the answer is no, I think a second question would be after you've sorted them into buckets and kind of looked at, okay, what are big picture revisions? What are things that are one time only? I think what I would look at across your reviews, whether you have two or you have three, is what are the areas where all of the reviewers are in agreement? So sometimes you'll get three reviewers that want three totally different things, with your article or your book proposal or whatever it is. And to me, it's a little bit more telling if you see that two people out of three said you really should, reorganize your introduction to make your theory a little bit more evident from the beginning. So if two people said that out of your three, to me, that's a sign that that's something that probably needs to be done. So I don't just look at the actual revisions that are requested. I also look at how many people asked for the revisions requested, because that makes a difference to me in, okay, how much is my argument getting through to my readers and so on. So those are two things to take a look at. A third thing that I would look at, if you can't do some of the revisions, I would ask yourself why. And there can be lots of reasons. You're the writer, so you have control over the situation. Sometimes I've had clients, and this is one of the reasons actually why clients will come to us, is they have, say, some revise and resubmit feedback on an article. But when they come to us, the reason they've come to us is because whatever is being requested is something that they don't know how to do necessarily. So it's like kind of a technical gap there. They're not totally sure how to, for example, do something like triangulate data when somebody said maybe you should do that. They might come to us for that reason. But another reason they might think through coming to us would be that for whatever reason, the revisions seem really overwhelming. And this is something that I'm starting to see more and more. I'm actually a little bit surprised by this because where many academics are really maxed out, not as many of us are accepting, as many reviews as we used to. I know I don't review for as many scholarly journals as I used to because just, workloads are higher, there's more work. So I try to put that type of work in the summer when I have more time to do it. And to me, anybody that hits me up for a review and I can knock it out during the summer, I'll do it. But during the school year, I'm going to turn you down. So this is something that I know, a lot of other academics were just very mindful about our time. And maybe we only review 3 articles a year instead of 5 that we used to do. So I'm surprised, just given, maybe a lack of reviewers not having as much time, that the reviews that are coming back, I'm starting to see some, I would say, pretty negative ones for lots of reasons that in some ways are maybe nitpicky, but in other ways have a lot of things that they are asking these writers to do. And so, what to make of the situation, I don't know. I have seen it across disciplines because, as I mentioned, that's one of the reasons people come to us, because they're not totally sure how to approach something where maybe there's 20 things they need to do in the manuscript and they only know how to do 6 of those things. So one of the things I would think about is if you feel like you can't do some of that revision, I would try to figure out why. Again, technical issues could certainly be one, like you don't know how to do it. You legitimately don't know how to do it. Another thing, though, could be that if you make that revision, it's going to cause a problem somewhere else in the manuscript. So here's a good example. I just looked at somebody's feedback on the literature review portion of their article. And the critique was that they really wanted this person to work in sources that were newer than 2020. So this person had some sources in there from like 2017, 2018, something like that. Well, one of the arguments that was going on in this manuscript was about a situation pre-COVID. And so, of course, changing literature to make it post-COVID or in the moment, after 2020, that's certainly going to change things. And it also would have required some rewriting in other places in the article. So one of the things that client decided ultimately to do, because it kind of made a mess everywhere else to do that, is they ignored it, but then they wrote a note back and said why they weren't going to do that particular revision. So another thing to think about is that sometimes you can look at the revisions and say, I'm not going to do that, and actually have a logical reason why I cannot do that. So that literature review certainly would have been a logical reason. Another reason that somebody might do that is whatever is being asked for won't work in the scope of the manuscript. So for example, I had another person that came to us a couple of months ago where the reviewer really wanted them to talk about this particular issue. And had they done so, the article itself only could be like 8,000 words, but to tackle this particular topic would have probably required maybe 1,000 to get in there. So it was one of those things where the person who was doing the writing just decided to make a quick footnote and move on rather than do the thing that the revisor or the reviewer asked for. So, there's another way that you can handle it in there. But another way to think through why maybe you can't do one of the revisions is that you just can't do it because it does not meet what your project is trying to do. So I'm somebody that's in this position or has been in this position before. Rarely do I say, no, I'm not going to do a revision. And sometimes I will honestly try to do all the ones I can do. And then for ones I can't, I will have a rationale as to why I can't do them. But I have had a couple of projects where just big picture wise, I couldn't do what the reviewers were asking, but it wasn't even that I couldn't do it. It was like I probably could, but I didn't want to. And so I want to close this particular episode just saying that, a lot of academics, of course, are very concerned about making sure they get published. And particularly, if you're on a tenure track, you've got a timeline, you can't really mess around a whole lot. If you're in the position where you've got a little more time to wait, it may just be that outlet is not right for you. So I had this with a long-term outlet that I had worked with for a long time. And, I was not willing to make a change that was requested. And I would not do it because I knew it would change the nature of the project. And to me, the whole reason I cared about the project was because of the particular issue that was there. So I knew I couldn't do it. So, yes, I was in the fortunate position that I could walk away and have a little time to try to find another outlet for the project. And I did. But sometimes it might be that you're saying no because you just know you can't do it. And I knew if I did it, I would just feel really kind of bad about the project because that's not what it was supposed to look like. It would not have represented my participants fairly. There was no scenario where I could have been really happy with that work. So, to think about it, when you're trying to look at your revisions and you get that feedback back, I might just look at it and again, just make those decisions. So to recap, take a look at it and see, do these revisions, make me upset or cranky in any way besides a time and labor and just the annoyance of it coming back as a revise and resubmit. I totally get that. But, is there anything that's really bothering you about any of it? If not, then I think your next step is just to sort it into those buckets. What's a big problem everywhere in the manuscript? What's a big problem just in one place, and so on, and get together and look at how many reviewers are asking for those things. So that would be another step to take. And then finally, when you're looking at it, you always have the option to walk away. So, I ended up doing that with one project because I realized I couldn't do what was being asked in that revision, and it worked out fine. I found another outlet. There's lots of scholarly outlets out there. There's more journals being put out there every day. And many of us are at institutions where it's not the end of the world. If one journal says no, you can go to something else. Or if one press says no, you can go to a different one. So, there's a lot of ways to think through that feedback. But yeah, I think thinking through your revisions and looking at them just to see where you are in this process and not lose your own voice is really important, particularly as, a lot of us are looking at journals and trying to get some stuff out there. You don't want to just, kind of do everything that they tell you to do without thinking about it. It's really important to think if you can live with some of those changes or not. And, of course, we want to respect our reviewers' time because a lot of feedback that comes from reviewers is very, kind, well-meaning, good suggestions, very constructive feedback. And a lot of times it does make the manuscript better. So good way to kind of look through and just decide, what can I live with? What can I? How am I going to approach it? And go from there. So as always, we're helpful. We're happy to help you with any of those revision tests that you might have at Fun Publish and Lead. And happy writing this week.